Good afternoon. My name is Shivaughn Ferguson, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Enforcement at the National Fair Housing Alliance. First, I want to begin and say thank you to Dr. Duckett and her team at the Greenville Human Relations Commission for hosting today's fair housing event. Today, we are brought together to remember the 53rd anniversary of the passing of the Fair Housing Act and also to reflect on the work Dr. King did to bring us to this moment shortly before he was assassinated, also 53 years ago. Today, we do the work to ensure that the Fair Housing Act is more than just words, and Dr. King's dream can become realized. So, before I begin, as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. After this session, we will have a live roundtable where we will be sure to answer your questions. I will also be sure to include my email address in the chat at the end of the session. So that way, if you have additional questions, you can follow up with me via email. So I hope you guys enjoy today's session. I'll be talking about, I'm going to share my screen, but I'll be talking about fair housing challenges in real estate transactions and specifically focused on what's happening in the current market. But before we get to that point, we will talk about the basics for those who may be new to fair housing. So first, I'm with the National Fair Housing Alliance, or we say NAFA. We were founded in 1988, and we are based in Washington, D.C. We are the only civil rights organization, national civil rights organization, that is solely dedicated to the elimination of housing discrimination. We are a member organization, so we have over 220 private nonprofit fair housing organizations, state and local civil rights organizations, and individuals, throughout the United States that are members of our organization. If you want to join NAFA, feel free to hop onto our website and click the join button. At NAFA, we recognize the importance of home as an essential component to realizing the American dream, or what we view as the American dream. And we envision a country, because of that, we envision a country free of housing discrimination, where inclusive, integrated, barrier-free neighborhoods are the norm. And we do that work through a lot of work through these departments. We have a small but mighty team, and one of our teams is the Education Outreach Team, which provides fair housing training to members of the public, industry folks, partners and organizations, and our members about their fair housing rights and responsibilities. We have a national media campaign through that department where you may see our PSAs in when you're watching HGTV or a billboard or what have you. Just again, educating people about fair housing rights and responsibilities. We have an enforcement and investigations department, which is the department that I am part of. We conduct national systemic investigations across the country to make sure people are following fair housing laws. We sometimes engage in systemic investigations with our partners when we're called to do so. If we find evidence of housing discrimination, we may file a complaint at HUD or at a FAP similar to Greenville Human Relations Commission. We may file a federal lawsuit or a state lawsuit. Just kind of depends on the facts of that moment. We have a compliance department, so some companies within the housing industry will ask us for confidential consulting and training compliance, and we can provide that. And we have a public policy team, which promotes fair housing and provides educational and resource services to Congress, state legislators, and federal, state, and local regulatory agencies. They also work with our member organizations to monitor legislation at the local level and ensure that the Fair Housing Act remains strong and can be strengthened throughout the country. And we are a membership organization, so we have a member services team, which makes sure that Our members are provided with direct technical assistance to make sure that they can serve their local communities, and educate the public within their local area as well. And most recently, we created a tech equity initiative, which works to look at technology and the use of data and ensure that there are not any adverse impacts to housing discrimination or to fair housing through the use of data or technology. Okay, so we are going to get into what is fair housing. So before I get into the challenges of, again, fair housing in real estate transactions, I want to briefly cover the significance of Fair Housing Month and touch on just the basics of fair housing, because not everyone here is very familiar. Some people here are new to fair housing. I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page before we get into delve into the nitty gritty of current fair housing trends and sales. So for those of you who are well versed in fair housing, I appreciate your patience. So with that said, let's start with the importance of the Fair Housing Act, and we are going to begin with a few decades prior to its passing with a video called "Race: The House We Live In."
It was a time when hundreds of thousands of GIs came home ready to start families, but had no place to live.
In the 1930s, the federal government created the Federal Housing Administration, whose job it was to provide loans or the backing for loans to average Americans so they could purchase a home.
Federal programs and banks sank millions into the home construction industry. Their message to veterans: you can afford a new home. Buy a new home now. Tax dollars helped make the single-family home a mass-produced consumer item. The American dream had a new name: suburbia.
We came to Levittown and we found the model house, and we walked in and we looked around, and of course, in the eyes of a young man who was raised in the ghetto, so to speak, it was an interesting experience, interesting lifestyle, seeing all the new modern conveniences, very fascinating.
Eugene Burnett came home with almost 1 million other black GIs. They had fought for the country in segregated ranks. They returned hoping for equality and the American dream. For many, that dream was a new home for little money down and some of the easiest credit terms in history.
I went up to the salesman. We're interested in your home, we're interested in buying one, and what is the procedure? Is there an application to be filled out? So forth. So he looked at me, looked around, and he said to me, he says, listen, it's not me, but the owners of this development have not as yet decided to sell these homes to Negroes.
The FHA underwriters warned that the presence of even 1 or 2 non-white families could undermine real estate values in the new suburbs. These government guidelines were widely adopted by private industry. Race had long played a role in local real estate practices. Starting in the 1930s, government officials institutionalized a national appraisal system where race was as much a factor in real estate assessment as the condition of the property. Using this scheme, federal investigators evaluated 239 cities across the country for financial risk.
So that those communities that were all white, suburban, and far away from minority areas, they received the highest rating, and that was the color green. Those communities that were all minority or in the process of changing, they got the lowest rating and the color red. They were redlined. As a consequence, most of the mortgages went to suburbanizing America, and it suburbanized it racially.
As homes in white communities appreciated in value, the net worth of these white families grew. For most non-white families who stayed in urban neighborhoods, the housing market open to them in the 50s and 60s was largely a rental market. You don't gain equity by paying rent.
Where one's family lives in America is not just a matter of taste and preference. You have the issue of housing and wealth. The majority of Americans hold most of their wealth in the form of home equity. So that's their nest egg. That's how they can finance the education of their offspring. That's how they can sort of save up for retirement. It's their savings bank, right? They're living in their savings bank.
My family, like a lot of families, was in Detroit, struggling to buy a house. You had a dual housing market, one white, one black. A housing market with one with a lot of demand, another housing market with very little demand. My father lives in the house that I grew up in. The house today, 5-bedroom house, is worth about $20,000. That same house bought in the suburbs would be worth today about $320,000. So whites moving to the suburb were being subsidized in the accumulation of wealth, while blacks were being divested.
And these were public policy decisions in which, on one hand, people were given access to property, given title, and subsequently wealth, and on another hand, where people were not given access to property, did not generate wealth, and did not generate the kind of opportunity for the next generation.
So the video articulates the impact housing discrimination has on generational wealth of non-white communities left out of the housing market. However, housing discrimination continues to be heavily woven into the fabric of housing transactions, and non-white communities continue to be affected. According to a 2016 survey of consumer finances, the median net worth for white households was 10 times greater in 2016 than that of Black households. The median net worth for white households at that time was $171,000, where the median net worth of Black households was $17,600. The wealth gap between white households and Black households have increased largely due to the foreclosure crisis, which disproportionately had adverse impacts on households of color and particularly Black households. Owning property has been the American dream because it's the way Americans build generational wealth in our culture. The homeownership gap between white households and Black households is a spread of about 30 points, which is wider than it was when the Fair Housing Act passed, and potentially wider than it's been since 1900. The Fair Housing Act is significant, but we need to do more. Housing discrimination plays a significant role in this disparity. And if you look closely at this chart, you can see the light blue line is the gap rate, right? So you look at, this is the gap rate. This is the homeownership rate for Black households, and the homeownership rate for white households. So what we're seeing is over time, right now, we're seeing that the gap is at the highest. Since 2016, the wealth gap has continued to widen as well. So the home ownership gap has widened, and the wealth gap has widened. The Federal Reserve Board's survey of consumer finance reveals that among Black families, households' net worth have remained in the range of between $15,000 to $25,000 over the last 30 years. In contrast, the net worth for white families has been in the range of $115,000 and $200,000. And again, if you look at this chart, you'll see the dark blue line is shows the household net worth for white families. This light gray line is other multiple race. You have this like dark gray line for Black households, and then this lighter line is for Latino Hispanic households. And this research was done by City Research and the Federal Reserve, as I said earlier. In 1965, Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led the Chicago Freedom Movement campaign to expand civil rights protections. Dr. King understood the importance of making sure that we had free access to housing in order to ensure that we had access to wealth and freedom in this country. As Dr. King said in 1965, in the South, we've always had segregationists to help make issues clear. But in the North, discrimination was still an issue. It just looked differently. Dr. King wanted to make apparent that Black residents were not welcome in the white neighborhoods of the North as well. By the summer of 1966, the campaign organized marches through all white neighborhoods and met with harassment from white residents at a level of hostility and hate that even Dr. King had not experienced. In addition to the demonstrations, Dr. King organized what we now call or refer to as testing to see what would happen when an individual Black home seeker and an individual white home seeker inquired about the same type of housing. What he found is that couples who were sent to inquire about housing that were white were steered to white neighborhoods in Chicago, and couples that were Black or non-white were steered to non-white or Black areas of Chicago. His goal was to use this information to prove the need to pass legislation and create policies that would finally outlaw housing discrimination. Unfortunately, Dr. King was assassinated 2 years later, and he was unable to live to see the realization of his dream. I'm going to show you a video that we call 7 Days. 7 Days was produced by Nationwide in commemoration of the passing of the Fair Housing Act. I believe the 45th anniversary of the passing of the Fair Housing Act was when they created it, and they updated it in the 50th anniversary. 7 Days shows you what transpired between the time Dr. King was assassinated to the passing of the Fair Housing Act.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community.
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out.
I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Cause you're present, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take you'll take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last, this afternoon, of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
The fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
So we wouldn't be here today without the work of Dr. King. Typically when I show that video in a training or a presentation and we are in person and have discussion, typically the discussion leans to, we've come away, but we still have a lot more work to do. And seeing some of those visuals is a reminder that it's almost a mirror up to where we are at sometimes in our current societies. We still have a lot of work to do, but the positive is that we do have enforcement options when somebody experiences discrimination now, and somebody does have a path to seek justice when they experience housing discrimination. It doesn't change that it happened. Their lives will never go back to the moment that they did not experience discrimination, but there are now paths to becoming as whole as possible. And that's the importance of the Fair Housing Act, and the work that all of us do to ensure that people are aware of their rights and responsibilities. So the Some Protected Classes, they went over it. What I wanted to touch on, because most of you probably already know what the 7 protected classes are at the federal level, is that recently in February, HUD announced that they now consider discrimination due to a person's sexual orientation and gender identity as sex discrimination, and they will investigate and enforce those claims under that basis. So currently, under this current HUD administration, there are protections for people within the LGBT community, and that's under this administration, and our work is to make sure that becomes the law of the land. And also to point out that it's not just how a person identifies. That if somebody discriminates against me because they identify me because I have kids, and they're like, I'm not going to rent to you because you have kids, or sell to you because you have kids, that is obviously unlawful. But if I don't have kids and they assume and make an assumption that I have kids and choose not to sell to me or allow me to be their client because they don't want to work with someone with kids, just because they got my demographic wrong doesn't mean that I don't have rights or claims under the Fair Housing Act. They still violated the law just even though they assumed incorrectly. There are two purposes of the Fair Housing Act. One, what we mostly know is to eliminate housing discrimination. What people tend to forget is that the second purpose is to promote residential integration. That last bullet point, which I'm going to read to you, real estate agents seem to forget. I think if you've ever engaged in a housing transaction with real estate agents, or if you are in the industry, I think if you read this bullet point, you might be able to think of some statements that have been made that kind of cut against that. And so it's important as we do our work to keep the industry accountable. The reason why our communities are so segregated, the reason why the homeownership gap between white communities and non-white communities are so wide is because we let things slide and we don't hold people accountable. So it's important that when we do our work, we hold people accountable. When people are engaging in steering, make statements, we need to make sure we go back to the regs and the law. People often ask if discrimination still happens, and the answer is yes. NAFA estimates there are over 4 million acts of discrimination that occur each year. Only a few people actually report housing discrimination. When we find evidence of discrimination, and when I say find evidence, I mean like a pattern of discrimination. If we're filing a complaint or a lawsuit, it's because there's been a pattern of discrimination across a series of investigations. When we find them, rarely do testers even know or feel they experience discrimination. This is because real estate agents are well versed in fair housing. They know what they should and should not say. And so they present themselves as kind and helpful. They come up with what sounds like a reasonable reason for why they cannot take you on as a client. But what the testers don't know, and what we see by being able to analyze, a Black tester's experience and a white tester's experience, or a Latino tester's experience versus a white tester's experience, is that we get to see the difference of how the same agent treats two people differently based on the protected class status, and it occurring over a series of times. And most people go into a transaction, one, not expecting to be discriminated against, but two, they don't know what real estate agent A has said to a consumer they've never interacted with. And so housing discrimination remains uncovered. We call that discrimination with a smile, which I'm sure you've heard about before. When we see great disparities like the racial wealth gap and the homeownership gaps between white households and non-white households, we must question what behaviors contribute to it. So we're going to talk about the fair housing challenges in today's real estate market. It's a big topic. We can probably spend days discussing all the barriers of homeownership due to one's protected class. But we're going to touch on a few topics, and hopefully we can delve more into it in the areas that you're interested in during the question and answer period. So current typical fair housing trends that we see. If you have not already watched any videos or read the report, I encourage you to take a look at the Newsday article. Newsday conducted a 3-year investigation of 93 real estate agents in Long Island, New York. Those tests were video recorded. Again, I'll drop the link to the website in the chat. If you haven't already taken a look at it, you should check it out. The results were striking. There was a significant percentage of discrimination rate that Black testers experienced, Asian American testers experienced, and the Latino Hispanic testers experienced. Here is a briefing, a quick notes of what the Black testers experience, and I'm going to show you again a video of what differential treatment looked like for them. And I'm going to show it to you because when we come across housing discrimination in real estate sales, no service is one of the common things we see. We actually at NAFA filed a fair housing complaint in Mississippi a few years ago citing that particular reason, that particular issue. Agents just not willing to interact with non-white or non-white testers. So I'm going to show you this clip. I'm going to put myself on mute.
In Newsday's investigation of real estate practices on Long Island, we discovered that agents engaged in disparate treatment that amounted to denial of equal service.
Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
They imposed additional stipulations on the minority testers that they did not impose on the white tester. For example, they would tell a minority tester that the minority tester needed to be pre-qualified for a mortgage in order to receive either listings or to get a tour of homes.
So you need that.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Can't even look at listings or anything.
I wouldn't know what to show you.
However, that same stipulation was not imposed on the white tester.
Is it possible to, for you to start sending me some listings?
I can send you listings in those areas.
Particularly, blacks were on the receiving ends of this unequal treatment. In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor.
You know, I don't know my way around out here.
They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
Are you pre-qualified? I asked you. My husband's working with somebody in a bank. And he will obtain a pre-approval from the mortgage lender?
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to know that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings.
Let's meet 11:30. Would you rather come with me? Rather than follow me? Yeah. Okay, good. I'll make sure my car is sparkling clean.
And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. Bichon did not respond to requests for comment. Another test involved the black tester, Kelvin Toon, who was going to see an agent by the name of Aminta Abarca at Keller Williams in Garden City.
You'll come with your wife and you'll sign the commitment.
Over the course of 2 visits, Abarca stressed the need to sign an exclusive buyer's agreement.
If we have a contract, then I'm working exclusively for you.
Without the contract, she refuses to take him on a tour of homes. So as Kelvin is driving back from his aborted meeting with the agent, Kelvin's counterpart, the white tester, receives a voicemail from the agent asking him when can he go out on a tour of homes.
Hi, David. How are you? This is Aminta. I'm just calling to see if you've started to do some house hunting now that holidays are over.
She ultimately takes the white tester without him signing any kind of exclusive agreement with her.
West Hempstead, we saw 2 in West Hempstead. The
Yeah.
2-family one,
Yeah.
okay?
Right.
And then we saw the beautiful renovated one.
Abarca did not respond to requests for comment. Keller Williams' national spokesman wrote in an emailed statement, Keller Williams does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. All complaints of less than exemplary conduct are addressed and resolved.
I have coordinated more.
So I'm not going to show you the entire video just for the sake of time, but I encourage you again to take a look at their website. It's really well done, and they did great work. And that was Fred Freiberg, who is one of our. He's the executive director at the Fair Housing Justice Center in New York City, and he is, which is one of our members at NAFA, and he does great work as well. So neuroservice. the what they represented is pretty common. And those are reasonable excuses that agents provide, right? Like it makes sense that an agent says, you know, I have a limited amount of time. I'm only working commission. I only want to work with serious buyers. So in order to know that you're a serious buyer, you have to show me that you are qualified with a lender, are pre-approved through a lender, so that I know that you actually qualify for the amount of the homes that we are looking at. And I'm going to need you to sign a buyer's agreement. So that way, you know, I know that you're not going to take my commission to another agent. That sounds reasonable. The issue is that what we find is that the agents tend to only place those requirements and enforce those requirements onto testers or home buyers who are not white. And that's when it's a problem, when there's when they are doing it only to certain communities. In this current market, where agents aren't interacting, especially this time last year, when agents were not interacting with consumers, it was all happening virtually. I had a tester who was told by the agent that they were not going to even show them, like send them a listing or do a virtual tour with them until they submitted and uploaded a photo ID, which is also another way that another barrier that agents can have been known to require of non-white testers or non-white buyers over white buyers. So when we think about the racial wealth gap and homeownership gap, you know, it's hard for people to gain access to communities if agents aren't willing to represent them. It takes longer to purchase a home. I'm working with a client who could have purchased a home in October had they not experienced discrimination, and currently is still looking for a home because that particular seller would not sell to them. Appraisal discrimination. If you haven't heard about it yet, you will, because it's becoming one of the trending fair housing trends, discrimination cases that are evolving. The housing movement is very focused on it right now, and consumers really are doing a lot of the work proving and taking this issue into their own hands, and doing their own testing to show that their homes are being appraised based off of whoever the appraiser believes lives in their home. So Black home buyers are learning that if they want to refinance their home, they are having to, I wouldn't say they're finding, I think it's been a common practice, but now they're making it, now home buyers are making it more public that they're doing this, putting a spotlight on it nationally. But what they are doing is having to erase photos of themselves, so that way the appraisers believe that what they're walking into is a white home. And even at times having their friends or neighbors or spouses who are white be the only sole presence in the home while the appraiser is there. That way, to see if there's a difference in their home value, and what they find is shocking. So I'm going to show you one of our most recent news clips about that. Not ours, but a most recent news clip.
No secret that home ownership is the pathway to building wealth in America. But what's hard in the Bay Area is even harder for some.
And tonight, a look at the growing inequity in home ownership rates in the Bay Area. ABC 7 News race and culture reporter Julian Glover has the story of a Marin couple who almost got cheated out of $500,000.
You know what I mean? It was work, but it was exciting.
Paul and his wife Tanisha Austin felt like they captured a slice of the American dream in 2016 when they purchased their first home together, this original Marin City pole home. But it wasn't without challenges.
As soon as like a house came on the market, you go in, you put your bid in, and then you get outbid it by like 100,000 or more rather quickly. And that can be, you know, a little bit depressing.
They bought the home off market from another black family hoping to make homeownership a reality for a young black couple. After moving into the home built in the 1960s, the Austins staged major renovations, adding an entire floor and more than 1,000 square feet of space, along with a deck, new floors, a fireplace, and new appliances. Then they got it appraised.
I read the appraisal, I looked at the number, I was like, this is unbelievable.
The family tells me the appraiser was an older white woman, and they're convinced race was a factor. The home appraised for $989,000, just $100,000 more than the Austins got it appraised for before they started the work, despite $400,000 in renovations.
It was like, you know, it was a slap in the face.
The Austins immediately called their lender and pushed back. After a month of escalating their complaints, they were approved for a second appraisal. When the date came, they got creative.
We had a conversation with one of our white friends, and she was like, no problem, I'll be Tanisha. I'll bring over some pictures of my family. She made our home look like it belonged to her.
And it worked.
So it appraised for 1.482.
Yeah.
Which was 50% more than what it appraised for by a couple weeks prior.
Almost 1.5, $500,000 more.
The Austins were outraged and believe this is another ugly result of larger systemic issues.
There are implications of the ability to create generational wealth or pass things on if our house is appraised for 50% less than what is valued at.
We know discrimination is in nearly every aspect of the home buying process, and really we need to be addressing it as an industry.
Discrimination in the housing market comes in many forms and has a long history in our country and in the Bay Area.
So I paused it again for time purposes, but you know, she eloquently stated the connection between appraisals and homeownership. And when your property is undervalued by almost $500,000, that's $500,000 that, you know, your family and your kids will not receive, you know, and you know, another family down the road, just because of the color of skin, is able to access. The value of one's home, it plays an important role in, you know, a family's ability to accumulate wealth. A Princeton University study notes that even among Black families, owning homes, properties do not appreciate at the same rate as properties held by other ethnic groups. This is a reflection of the location of Black-owned homes in areas where with generally lower home values, and bias in the ways others view Black homeowners. So even though the Great Recession's housing crisis featured a wave of foreclosures, in the subsequent 10 years, white homeowners were more likely to see home prices appreciate by 3 percentage points on average, versus Black families who don't see a recovery. In fact, they had a negative 6% on average. And that's, you know, I'm sure that's something that resonates with a lot of us on this call. Hate crimes and hate incidents. So it's, you know, we are often see somebody in the news or on social media being harassed in their neighborhood. And I don't tend to see in that conversation the narrative around the potential Fair Housing Act violation. And that's something that we need to make sure that we uplift and we talk about. according to FBI hate crime stats in 2015, nearly 6,000 bias incidents were reported and involved over 7,000 victims. The top bias category was race with 56.9%, which is significant because in housing discrimination complaints, disability is the highest reported or complaint, and that's around 50% as well. And race tends to be around the third highest category. So the fact that it's that high for hate activity and hate incidents, we need to make sure we're paying attention to that and we're providing options for and avenues for justice when anybody experiences that. Of the data that included location of hate crime incident, 31.5% occurred in or near a residence of home. So the hate crime incidents reported in 2015, about 1,843 occurred in or near a residence or home. What's also important to note is that local police departments aren't required to report or even collect data on hate crimes. It's a volunteer thing. So that number might actually be high, or is most likely higher, because many police departments don't report their hate crime activity. That's something else we need to, at the local level, you should look into if your local police departments are reporting, and if not, working to get that done, so we have a realistic understanding of what's actually happening. So there's a difference between hate crimes and hate activity that could be considered a Fair Housing Act violation. Hate crimes can also be a Fair Housing Act violation, but they are considered a criminal offense against a person or party or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against that person's protected class status. So there has to be a criminal activity or offense associated to that. They define it as, the FBI defines a hate crime as a traditional criminal offense like murder or arson or vandalism with an added element of basis. So knowing how the FBI and police officers define a hate crime is important when advocating for complainants who may be victims of housing discrimination and unable to find justice within a criminal court. When a hate crime occurs as defined by the FBI, then fair housing advocates should step in when appropriate and educate the victims on their fair housing rights as well. But when hate activity occurs within or near residence and does not rise to the definition of a hate crime, fair housing advocates can still step in and get involved by educating and informing the person who is a victim of the harassment and discrimination that they could find relief or damages or justice by filing a fair housing complaint. This is really important because it was a few years ago that somebody had experienced, a family had experienced significant harassment by their neighbor. The neighbor went so far as to pour gasoline at all entrances of their home. They brought out a shotgun and threatened to shoot the person while he was holding his kids. He spray painted on their fence, the KKK is going to burn you. And when the police arrived the first time, when this was happening, they said, you're drunk, go to sleep. There's nothing we can do about this. When it rose the level of him putting gasoline at every entrance of this person's house and bringing out and holding a shotgun at the person when the police arrived, then the police took him in and arrested him for the weekend, and he was released on bail that weekend, and eventually was sent to prison for like 2 or 3 months. And the family was traumatized, and the kids were traumatized. They were afraid for their lives, and they didn't know that they can seek, that they could find other ways of, you know, they had to move because they were afraid to live right next to this person. They had no clue, you know, what else they could have done, and it shouldn't have ever risen to the level of gasoline poured all over their house or a shotgun. The moment that, you know, he was graffitiing their fence, saying the KKK wanted to burn them, should have been the moment that somebody intervened and said, "This is not right. This is unlawful. You have protections, and let's, you know, intervene here." So that's an option under the Fair Housing Act. So when you see a situation where neighbors are harassing people because they don't want them living in their community, or because of their protected class status, you know, if you're a fair housing advocate, go ahead and step in that moment and let the victim know that there's options. Owners, managers, and HOAs and condo associations may be liable for neighbor-on-neighbor harassment for failing to intervene if they know that the harassment's happening, and they know why it's happening. And again, defendants can also be neighbors. So this is there's a really strong protection here that people don't tend to talk about. Here's a great example, a recent example of how Fair Housing Act has been helpful in a situation that did not amount to a hate crime. Under the Fair Housing Act, victims of hate activity have the opportunity to obtain additional relief, as I talked about. So in August of 2016, the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights announced the settlement of Howe v. Kalari, a discrimination case filed in the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois. The case alleged that a neighbor harassed and stalked 2 African-American teenagers and their mother and repeatedly called them the N-word in suburban Mount Prospect. The terms provided for a confidential but substantial sum of monetary relief and an in-court apology. So, you know, that probably sounds a lot of situations that we see around social media or in the news. You know, think about that when you're working when something like that happens in your area. And then steering is still very, very common. You know, and I kind of alluded it to earlier, when real estate agents tell somebody that, you know, now that they saw you, they're not going to show you a community, or, you know, you really are going to not want to live there, and encourage you to check out the neighborhood at night because it seems dangerous. And they're not telling that to the other person, or they are over exaggerating drawbacks to community and never talking about the positive. Those are steering statements, and those still happen. Schools are still being used as proxies for steering, even with our testers or home buyers who pose as people who don't have children. Steering can happen within neighborhoods. They can happen from, you know, within the MSA, and even within new development communities. They might have separate development communities for different protected classes. So that is very common. You may have seen this map before. This is from an investigation in a case that we filed of Century 21 Town and Country in 2005. For those who are familiar, this is Detroit, and this line is 8 Mile. The areas that are red are predominantly Black, and the areas that are white are predominantly white. And as you can see, this community is hyper segregated. We had testers inquire about housing, about purchasing a home. They were interested in with similar types of homes. They inquired about about homes at the same what we call at the same homes, the same properties they were interested in. So let's say like this little black dot right here with a star. They inquired about that home, and the African American tester, which are the yellow dots, was steered into the African American neighborhood, the Black neighborhoods. And so if they're interested in this home right here, they were taken all the way over here. The white tester is the green dots and was shown homes not only in the area that are in close proximity to the home that they inquired about, but also shown homes predominantly in predominantly white neighborhoods. This is a map of Atlanta for another case that we did, and you see the similar results. When communities are hyper-segregated, it makes it so much easier for real estate agents to steer people into different communities. And in this situation, this was against Remax in Buckhead, Atlanta. Agents not only steered our testers, they also refused to honor appointments. So they would first accept the appointments and then they just would not show up. White testers were told about financial incentives that were not told to black testers. Again, this just shows you how the home ownership gap and the wealth gap continue to widen because these practices are not unique. They're common practices. And then really quickly, I'm going to go over the pandemic and some market changes that may have an impact on fair housing. The real estate industry, like the rest of us, has not experienced stabilization over the past year. It has had to adjust and readjust multiple times throughout this past year. So the true effects of how their behaviors have impacted fair housing really won't be seen or known for a few months by now. I can tell you about the few trends that I have seen over the course of the year that have been consistent. And that's what we're going to talk about. So how people are seeing homes. The real estate market adapted really quickly and has done a significantly better job as a whole at adjusting than the rental market. It is common practice for real estate agents to offer clients virtual tours, and the industry has provided an array of options for agents and clients. So for example, there's a lot of live tour options where the agent will ask the client to hop on FaceTime or Zoom or even Facebook Live. They'll provide pre-recorded video walk tours, 3D self-guided virtual tours. Those are typically the most common, whatever works for the client. So availability and the quality of live tours, though, is dependent on cell service or self coverage of the home they're interested in or Wi-Fi service. But agents are really adaptable and, will typically find a solution for their client if, cell service isn't available. What we do need to be mindful, though, and some potential fair housing implications has to do with, one, making sure that there are safe, healthy options for people who have limited technology ability, and then also making sure that as we become more dependent on technology in the home buying process, real estate agents need to make sure that that technology is accessible to people with visual and hearing disabilities. In-person showings. So agents are not offering to drive home buyers to see a list of homes in their car right now. There might be a few of them, but that's really not the norm right now. Open houses are also few and far between, especially depending on the market. There are some markets, maybe it's more common. Instead, they're asking home buyers to be more decisive before seeing their first home, whether virtual or in person. Seller-occupied homes especially want to sell their home with as little risk to exposure to COVID-19. So sellers are preferring to open their homes to buyers who have already seen their home virtually and still interested in their home. Sellers are also asking to limit the number of people touring the homes at any given time. And some agencies will already have that policy in place, like limiting it to 3 people is the norm. 2 people is also kind of common. Yet real estate agents know that seeing a home virtually is not the same thing as seeing a home in person. So they really, really want to get that home buyer in a house because the house sells itself in a different way when the person's walking through it versus seeing it over photos, which is fine. But the adaptation, unfortunately, what's happening is that in order to get them in the home, they're creating some great policies, right, to making sure that we're all healthy, limiting the amount of people who are going, et cetera. But some policies that we have seen that are disturbing or concerning are policies that prohibit children from being able to tour the home with their parent. Limiting the amount of people in the home makes sense. Limiting who can tour the home based on their age is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Also, since sellers and buyers only want to work with serious or want to show their home to serious buyers now, again, if you think back to the home buyers agreement and the Reveal News investigation, where serious, the excuse of serious buyers is excuse given to just not serve certain individuals, we need to be mindful of how that's playing out in COVID, how that's being used as an excuse just to not interact with certain home buyers, or the assumption that somebody is not going to be a serious home buyer just based on the color of their skin, or their familial status or disability, religion, etc. Self-guided tours is an option. The thing about self-guided tours is it's great. It's a really great safe alternative where an agent will give a person a unique lockbox code to enter the home. Some strange things that we have seen are the requirement to submit photo IDs. That's not common practice. It's not an industry standard, but we have seen that request from some companies. And then an agreement from home buyers or home seekers to agree to have their biometric data stored and collected. So if you don't know what biometric data is, that's like your fingerprints or your facial features. And that's concerning because we already know that there's surveillance of Black and brown communities, and being over surveilled is already problematic. So not understanding how that data is being stored and collected and used by the third party is something, again, you don't want to be concerned about to make sure that it's not disproportionately impacting non-white communities. And then we also want to make sure that when they're asking for IDs, they're not requiring specific government IDs. And, because there could be some national origin implications. So some policies they have, so it's pretty common now. You guys know that if you go to the doctor's office or the dentist, they're going to ask you to do a health screening check because they want to keep their staff and everyone around them safe and healthy. And real estate offices, if you can't just walk in, typically you have to schedule an appointment to meet with somebody at a new construction community or an office. And prior to that appointment, real estate offices will typically conduct a health screening, which is a series of questions inquiring, making sure that you're not currently have any COVID-19 symptoms. They may even ask you to do a check your fever at home, which is normal, right? It's become normal for us to go through that right now. The concern is that when they become overly intrusive, that could still be, people need to be very, very, very mindful that the policies and rules and questions are not going to be discriminatory against people with disabilities. And then the housing market is unpredictable right now. It's a really hot market, but it's been really unpredictable this past year. The unemployment market and what's happening with people's jobs and housing is still kind of up in the air. So some lenders have responded to the pandemic-related unemployment by tightening credit. I've seen one lender require, I believe, 20% down and a credit score of 7 something in order to qualify for a loan. That's really tight. And also verifying loan eligibility closer to the closing date or multiple times throughout the transaction because of especially this time last year, because people's job situations were changing so quickly. But what that means is real estate agents may respond by confirming buyer eligibility or increasing standards of working with them. When the market tightened up during the Great Recession, we noticed that real estate agents again were requiring pre-approval letters and signed buyer agreements. Again, just going back to that Reveal News study, this could be concerning and another way that people are discriminated against in housing. And last slide, it's a really hot housing market right now, and agents have been really hard to reach. It's intense, it's uniquely hot everywhere. Homes are selling within days of being on the market. People are being told, sellers are being told that, really be sure about wanting to put your house on the market, because once you put your house on the market, it's going to sell in 2 days. And they're being sold at above listing. It's a really interesting market right now, especially at this time of year. So real estate agents are telling our testers that they're closing may take longer because there aren't enough appraisers, or there are not enough closing attorneys, or they need to find their own closing attorney or what have you, because it's just, there's just there's more work than there is supply. So most of our testers are having a really hard time just connecting with any agent. It's very unusual, it's very unexpected. But when there is low inventory and a high demand, and there's increased buyer competition, that's again, the agents and sellers, get to pick and choose at that point who they want to interact with. And it presents an opportunity for discrimination. So we really need to watch that closely. And then home buyers are buying remotely because there's a lot of relocation, especially among millennials right now, moving to lower cost markets. And they don't want to, hop on the plane and risk getting sick. And they're also just typically, whether you're in the market or not in the market, are trying to limit their exposure to people. So people are purchasing homes without being able to, before they can even inspect the home or see the home. And, that there could be some fair housing implications and just some general, just some general consumer violation concerns there. So just keep an eye on that and make sure that people are protected. And that's it. If you have any questions, again, feel free to drop it in the chat and we will get to them shortly. Thanks for hanging out with us.